The conclave of the 12 spheres had ruled the Orion Spur for 11,000 years, and in all that time, they had never once failed to bring a new species to heel. Their methods were simple, their results absolute, and their reputation spread across 100,000 star systems like a shadow that devoured hope itself. Ambassador Velthrani of the Scythian Dominion stood on the observation deck of his diplomatic cruiser, the Gentle Accord, and watched the small blue world grow larger in his viewport. It was unremarkable in every way that mattered, a tiny sphere of water and rock orbiting an average yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. His species had visited 10,000 worlds just like this one. They had cataloged the primitive radio signals, studied the crude spacecraft, and calculated exactly how long it would take for the native species to accept their place in the conclave's grand design. Sometimes it took days, sometimes weeks, but the outcome was always the same. Ambassador, we have completed our final sensor sweep of the system, his tactical officer reported from the command deck below. The humans possess approximately 200 vessels capable of interplanetary travel, none larger than what we would classify as a light corvette. Their weapon systems appear to be chemical propellant-based, with some primitive directed energy installations on their inner worlds. Velthrani allowed himself a thin smile. This was going to be even easier than he had anticipated. The Conclave's intelligence division had classified humanity as a pre-expansion primitive species, barely capable of reaching their own moon a mere century ago. They posed no threat whatsoever. And their population, he asked, though he already knew the answer from the briefing documents. 12 billion across their home world and several colonial installations throughout their system. A respectable labor pool, ambassador. The conclave will be pleased. Labor pool, that was all these humans were. That was all any species was until they proved otherwise, and none ever did. The strong ruled and the weak served, and this simple truth had governed the galaxy since before Velthrani's ancestors first looked up at the stars. He turned to face his senior staff, his 4 arms clasped behind his back in a pose of absolute confidence. Transmit the standard greeting and await their response. Inform them that the conclave of the 12 spheres offers them the honor of integration, and that I shall personally oversee the negotiation of terms. The communications officer bent to his task, and Velthrani returned his attention to the viewport. 6 escort frigates flanked his cruiser in perfect formation, each one carrying enough firepower to reduce a continent to molten glass. They were here as a reminder, nothing more. Most species surrendered the moment they understood the alternative. He thought about the Kethvari, a proud warrior race who had refused integration 3,000 years ago. Their homeworld was now a mining colony, their population scattered across conclave space as servants and laborers. He thought about the hollow worlds, once home to a civilization of artists and philosophers, now empty shells stripped of every resource. He thought about the burning of Nexus 7, where an entire system had been sterilized to make an example for neighboring species. The conclave did not make threats, they made promises and they always kept them. Ambassador, we are receiving a response from the human government, the communications officer announced. There was something strange in his voice, a note of confusion that made Velthrani turn sharply. Well, what do they say? It is quite brief, Ambassador. They say, hold position, a representative is en route. Velthrani's mandibles clicked together in irritation. This was not the standard response. Most species immediately began transmitting desperate pleas for mercy or futile declarations of defiance. This cold, simple message was something else entirely. No demands, no questions about our intentions. None, Ambassador, just the instruction to hold position. Strange indeed, but not concerning. Perhaps these humans were simply too primitive to understand what was happening. Perhaps their leaders needed time to comprehend the magnitude of what they faced. It did not matter. The outcome would be the same regardless. Very well, we shall wait for their representative. It changes nothing. An hour passed, then another. Velthrani grew impatient, packing the observation deck while his officers monitored their sensor arrays. The human vessels throughout the system had not moved from their positions. They had not fled, had not gathered for a futile defense, had done nothing at all. Ambassador, the tactical officer's voice cracked with sudden alarm. We are detecting an energy bloom near the fifth planet, the gas giant the humans call Jupiter. On screen, the main display flickered to life, showing a swirling mass of orange and brown storms that made up the massive planet. Near its northern pole, something was happening, a surge of power that made their sensors struggle to compensate. What am I looking at? Velthrani demanded. Unknown, Ambassador. The energy readings are beyond anything in our database. It appears to be some kind of vessel, but the size is impossible. Impossible? Explain yourself. The tactical officer's claws trembled as he worked his console. Initial readings suggest an object approximately 17 kilometers in length, but that cannot be correct. No vessel of that size has ever been constructed by any species in conclave records. 17 kilometers. Velthrani's cruiser was barely 1 kilometer from bow to stern, and it was considered a large vessel by conclave standards. The tactical officer had to be wrong. Your sensors are malfunctioning. Run a diagnostic immediately. I have already done so, Ambassador. 3 times. The readings are accurate. The object was moving now, emerging from behind Jupiter's massive bulk, and as it cleared the planet's shadow, Velthrani felt something he had not experienced in over 200 years of service to the conclave. Fear. The vessel that approached them was a mountain of black metal, angular and brutal in its design, covered in weapon arrays that defied comprehension. It moved through space with a grace that should have been impossible for something so massive, surrounded by a swarm of smaller ships that emerged from hangar bays along its flanks. Ambassador, I am counting over 300 support vessels launching from the main ship. Destroyers, carriers, and several classifications I cannot identify. Their combined firepower exceeds our entire sector fleet. Velthrani's mandibles had gone still. His 4 hands gripped the railing before him so tightly that his claws left marks in the metal. This was not possible. Species did not develop this quickly. Species did not hide this kind of power. Incoming transmission from the human vessel, the communications officer whispered. His voice was barely audible. Let me hear it. The voice that filled the observation deck was calm, measured, and completely without fear. It spoke in perfect Scythian, which meant the humans had been listening to conclave communications for far longer than anyone had suspected. Ambassador Velthrani of the Scythian Dominion, this is Admiral Helena Vance of the United Earth ship Prometheus. We have reviewed your conclave's history with great interest. We know what integration means. We know about the Kethvari and the Hollow Worlds and the burning of Nexus 7. You came to our system expecting to threaten children. You were badly misinformed. The transmission ended, and silence fell over the observation deck. Every officer had stopped working, stopped breathing, stopped everything except staring at the monstrous vessel that grew larger with every passing second. Velthrani tried to speak, tried to reassert his authority, tried to remember that he was an ambassador of the conclave and that he did not feel fear. But the words would not come, and the darkness outside his viewport seemed to grow deeper as the Prometheus approached. For the first time in 11,000 years, the conclave had made a terrible mistake. The Prometheus continued its approach for 3 hours, and with every passing minute, the fear aboard the gentle Accord grew thicker until it became almost impossible to breathe. Velthrani had retreated to the command deck, surrounded by his senior officers, all of them staring at sensor displays that showed readings none of them could explain. The vessel's power output is still climbing, the tactical officer reported. His voice had taken on a hollow quality, as if he were reading his own death sentence. At current levels, it exceeds the combined output of every power station in the Scythian Dominion. Ambassador, I do not understand how the ship holds together. The structural stresses alone should tear it apart. Velthrani said nothing. He had been silent for nearly an hour now, watching the black shape grow larger in the viewport until it blocked out the stars themselves. The Prometheus was not just a ship. It was a statement, a declaration written in metal and fire that said humanity would not kneel. Ambassador, what are your orders? Kethros, his second-in-command, moved to stand beside him. The younger officer's scales had gone pale with stress. Should we signal for reinforcements? The sector fleet could be here within 2 standard cycles. 2 cycles, that was 2 days in human time, and Velthrani knew with cold certainty that they did not have 2 days. They might not even have 2 hours. And what would I tell the sector commander? He asked quietly. That we have encountered a primitive species with a vessel larger than anything in Conclave history. That their technology appears to exceed our own by generations. They would think me mad, and by the time they arrive to see the truth, it would already be too late. Then what do we do? Velthrani turned to face his second-in-command, and for the first time in their long service together, Kethros saw uncertainty in his superior's eyes. The ambassador had negotiated the surrender of 47 worlds, had overseen the integration of a dozen species, had never once faced a situation he could not control, until now. We wait, Velthrani said finally. We learn what we can and we wait. The Prometheus came to a stop at a distance of 5,000 kilometers, close enough to fill half the viewport, close enough for the gentle Accord's optical sensors to pick out details on its hull. What they saw did not bring comfort. The vessel's surface was covered in weapon arrays of every conceivable type. Massive railgun batteries ran along its spine like the ridges of some ancient beast. Energy projectors of unknown design studded its flanks at regular intervals. Missile tubes by the hundreds dotted its forward sections, and in the center of its bow, a single massive aperture glowed with a faint blue light that made the tactical officer's instruments scream warnings. That forward weapon, the officer said, his voice cracking. Ambassador, the energy readings are consistent with graviton manipulation technology. We theorized it was possible but never achieved it. If the humans have actually built a graviton lance of that scale, a single shot could crush our entire formation like insects. Graviton manipulation, the ability to bend gravity itself into a weapon. The Conclave's greatest scientists had spent centuries trying to develop such technology without success. The idea that these primitives, these creatures who had been throwing rocks at each other just a few thousand years ago, had accomplished what the greatest minds of the galaxy could not was simply impossible to accept. And yet the evidence floated before them, 17 kilometers of impossible evidence. Incoming transmission, the communications officer announced. Audio only from the human admiral. Play it. Admiral Vance's voice filled the command deck once again, calm and professional as if she were discussing weather patterns rather than the fate of worlds. Ambassador Velthrani, I notice your escorts have raised their shields and armed their weapons. I want to be very clear about what happens next. You have 60 seconds to power down all weapons and lower your shields. After that, we will provide a demonstration of why your conclave's intelligence assessments require significant revision. The transmission ended, and every eye on the command deck turned to Velthrani. His mandibles clicked together as he processed the ultimatum. 60 seconds. The humans had given him 60 seconds to surrender 11,000 years of conclave supremacy. Ambassador, perhaps we should comply, Kethros said carefully. We do not know what that vessel is capable of, and our primary mission is to return intelligence to the conclave. We cannot do that if we are destroyed. It was sound advice, wise advice, the advice that any sensible officer would give in this situation. But Velthrani had not risen to his position by being sensible. He had risen by being bold, by taking risks that others would not, by refusing to show weakness in the face of threats. "No," he said, and the word came out harder than he intended. "The Conclave does not surrender to primitives. These humans are bluffing. They must be bluffing. No species develops technology this advanced in such a short time. It is a trick, an illusion designed to frighten us into submission. Ambassador, the sensor readings are very real. That ship is not an illusion." "Then it is stolen," Velthrani snapped. "Perhaps they found a derelict from some ancient civilization. Perhaps they reverse-engineered Conclave technology from our probe. Whatever the explanation, they cannot possibly know how to use such systems effectively. They are children playing with weapons they do not understand." He turned to his tactical officer with renewed determination. "Order the frigates to advance, targeting pattern Delta. Disable that vessel's engines and we will board it to learn the truth of this mystery." "Ambassador, I strongly advise against this course of action." "I did not ask for your advice. I gave you an order, carry it out." The tactical officer hesitated for a long moment, long enough that Velthrani began to wonder if he would need to relieve the man of duty. But training and discipline won out over fear, and the officer bent to his console to relay the commands. On the main display, the 6 escort frigates broke formation and began accelerating toward the Prometheus. Their shields flared bright as they charged their weapon systems. Plasma cannons began to glow with deadly energy. Missile tubes opened along their hulls. Velthrani watched them advance with grim satisfaction. The Conclave had conquered a galaxy with vessels like these. Surely 6 of them could handle a single ship, no matter how large. But as the frigates crossed the halfway point between the 2 formations, something changed on the Prometheus. Lights began to flicker along its hull, and the blue glow in its forward aperture intensified until it hurt to look at directly. "Ambassador, the human vessel is powering weapons," the tactical officer shouted. "Energy levels are spiking beyond anything I have ever seen. Ambassador, we need to recall the frigates immediately." "Hold your position. The Conclave does not retreat." "Ambassador." The word became a scream as the Prometheus fired. A beam of twisted light erupted from its forward aperture, crossing the distance between the vessels in less than a heartbeat. It struck the lead frigate dead center, and what happened next would haunt every survivor for the rest of their lives. The frigate did not explode. Explosions were honest things, violent but comprehensible. This was something else entirely. The vessel simply folded in on itself, compressed by invisible forces until a kilometer of advanced warship became a dense sphere of crumpled metal no larger than a ground transport. It had taken less than a second. One moment, a frigate crewed by 300 Conclave soldiers existed. The next moment it was nothing but a ball of debris tumbling through the void. Silence fell over the command deck of the Gentle Accord. Every officer had stopped breathing. Velthrani felt his legs weaken beneath him, and only his grip on the command rail kept him standing. "Graviton Lance confirmed," the tactical officer whispered. "Ambassador, they crushed that ship like it was nothing. The shields did not even slow the beam down." Velthrani stared at the twisted remains of his frigate, at the 5 remaining vessels that had stopped their advance in shock, at the massive black ship that had just rewritten everything he thought he knew about power in the galaxy. The humans had not been bluffing. They had not been playing with weapons they did not understand. They had built something terrible, something that even the Conclave in all its ancient glory could not match. And now, as Admiral Vance's calm voice filled the command deck once again, Velthrani finally understood the truth that would change everything. Humanity had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "Ambassador," the Admiral said, and there was something almost like pity in her tone. "That was your warning shot. You have 53 seconds remaining." Admiral Helena Vance stood on the bridge of the Prometheus and watched the alien frigates through the main display. Her hands were clasped behind her back in a pose of absolute stillness, but her mind was racing through calculations and contingencies that she had rehearsed 10,000 times over the past decade. She was 63 years old, with gray streaking through her short black hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of countless sleepless nights. She had dedicated her entire adult life to this moment. The moment when humanity would finally reveal itself to the galaxy, not as victims or supplicants, but as equals. "Admiral, the lead frigate has been neutralized," Commander Jackson Chen reported from the tactical station. His voice was steady despite the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. "The remaining 5 vessels have halted their advance. Energy readings suggest they are charging weapons for a full barrage." "As expected," Vance replied. "The Conclave does not know how to respond to resistance. Their entire strategy relies on overwhelming force and psychological intimidation. When those tactics fail, they have nothing to fall back on except more force." She turned to face her bridge crew, 50 men and women who represented the best that Earth had to offer, each one hand-selected from millions of candidates over the past 20 years. They were calm, professional, and absolutely confident in the ship they served. The Prometheus was not just a warship. It was a statement of defiance written in metal and fire. Its construction had begun 60 years ago in the hollowed-out interior of a captured asteroid, hidden from any possible alien observation. 3 generations of engineers and scientists had poured their lives into its systems, pushing the boundaries of physics to create something that should not have been possible. And it was only the beginning. "Commander Chen, open a channel to Jupiter Station. I want Admiral Morrison to bring the rest of the fleet to ready status. If these aliens decide to do something stupid, we end this quickly." "Aye, Admiral." Vance returned her attention to the viewport, thinking about the long road that had brought humanity to this moment. It had started in 2089, when a deep space telescope detected an anomalous object entering the outer solar system. Initial analysis suggested a comet, but closer observation revealed the truth. It was a probe, an alien probe, scanning and cataloging everything in its path. The world governments had panicked at first. There were calls for communication, for peace, for immediate surrender to whatever civilization had sent the device. But cooler heads had prevailed, and a decision was made that would shape humanity's future for the next 8 decades. They captured the probe. It had not been easy. The device was equipped with self-destruct mechanisms and advanced defensive systems. But human ingenuity had proven equal to the task, and within a year, the probe was safely contained in a secret facility beneath the mountains of Switzerland. What they learned from that probe had changed everything. Its memory banks contained star charts, species profiles, and historical records stretching back thousands of years. Humanity discovered that they were not alone in the galaxy, and that the galaxy was a very dangerous place. The conclave of the 12 spheres had ruled this region of space for 11 millennia. Their methods were brutal, their demands absolute, and their treatment of conquered species was nothing short of slavery. The probe's records showed world after world stripped of resources, population after population reduced to servitude, civilization after civilization erased from history. And humanity was next on their list. The response had been immediate and total. Every major government on Earth had set aside their differences and united under a single purpose: survival. Resources that had been wasted on petty conflicts were redirected toward research and development. The greatest minds of a generation were gathered together and given a single mandate: prepare humanity for war. The first breakthrough came in 2107, when a team of physicists cracked the secrets of gravity manipulation. The conclave had never achieved this technology, but humanity did it in less than 20 years. The second breakthrough came in 2115, with the development of faster-than-light communication. The third came in 2123 with the construction of the first prototype jump drive. Each advancement was kept absolutely secret. Humanity maintained the appearance of a primitive species, barely capable of interplanetary travel, while building a war machine in the shadows that would have made the Conclave tremble with fear. The Titan-class dreadnoughts were the crown jewel of this effort. 17 ships, each one 17 kilometers long, each one carrying enough firepower to crack a planet. They had been constructed in secret shipyards throughout the outer system, hidden in asteroids and moons and the depths of gas giant atmospheres. The Prometheus was the first of its kind, the flagship of a fleet that existed for one purpose only, to ensure that humanity would never kneel. "Admiral," Commander Chen interrupted her thoughts, "the alien frigates are opening fire. I count 47 plasma projectiles and approximately 200 guided missiles inbound. Raise all shields to full power, point defense systems to automatic." The Prometheus shuddered slightly as enemy fire began impacting its outer shields. On the tactical display, Vance watched plasma bolts splash harmlessly against barriers that had been designed to withstand far worse. The missiles were picked off one by automated laser batteries that tracked and destroyed targets faster than any biological mind could process. "Shield integrity holding at 98%, the engineering officer reported. "The enemy weapons are not even penetrating our outer layer." Vance allowed herself a small smile. The Conclave had ruled through fear for so long that they had forgotten how to innovate. Their weapons were thousands of years old, unchanged and unchallenged. They had never faced an enemy who could match them, let alone exceed them. "Enough playing defense," she said quietly. "Weapons free. Disable or destroy all hostile vessels. Leave the diplomatic cruiser intact. We need their ambassador alive." "Aye, Admiral, all batteries weapons free." The Prometheus came alive with terrible purpose. Railgun batteries along its spine began hurling projectiles at velocities that approached a significant fraction of light speed. Energy weapons that had no name in any alien database lanced out across the void. Drone swarms erupted from hidden bays, thousands of autonomous weapons platforms that moved with perfect coordination. The 5 remaining frigates never stood a chance. The first 2 were struck by railgun rounds that punched through their shields and armor like needles through paper. The impacts released so much kinetic energy that both vessels simply came apart, fragmenting into clouds of debris that spread across thousands of kilometers. The third frigate attempted to retreat, but a focused EMP burst disabled its engines and left it drifting helplessly. The fourth was swarmed by combat drones that systematically dismantled its weapon systems and sensor arrays until it was blind and toothless. The fifth frigate made one last desperate charge, pouring every weapon it had at the Prometheus in a suicidal attack. Vance almost admired their courage, but courage was not enough against superior firepower. A second graviton lance shot reduced the vessel to another compressed sphere of twisted metal. 11 seconds. That was all it had taken to destroy or disable 5 warships of the Conclave. Silence fell over the bridge of the Prometheus as the debris began to spread. Vance stared at the destruction they had wrought, feeling the weight of the moment settle onto her shoulders. This was not a victory to celebrate. This was a statement, a warning, a promise of what would come if the Conclave did not change its ways. "Admiral, the diplomatic cruiser is hailing us," the communications officer reported. "The ambassador is requesting immediate negotiations." "I'm sure he is," Vance replied. "Tell him I will be transporting aboard his vessel in 1 hour. In the meantime, he should consider very carefully what kind of future he wants for his Conclave." She turned away from the viewport and walked toward her ready room. There was much to prepare before the next phase began. The battle was over, but the real war, the war of words and wills and competing visions for the galaxy, was just beginning. And humanity intended to win. The hour that followed the battle was the longest of Velthrani's life. He stood on the observation deck of the Gentle Accord, surrounded by the debris of his escort fleet, and tried to understand how everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. 6 frigates, 6 of the Conclave's finest warships, crewed by nearly 2,000 of its best soldiers, reduced to scrap metal in less time than it took to draw a breath. The tactical displays still showed the wreckage spreading slowly through the void, a permanent reminder of a defeat that should have been impossible. His officers moved around him like ghosts, speaking in whispers and avoiding his eyes. They had all witnessed the same thing he had, and none of them had words to describe it. The Conclave had never lost a battle like this, not in 11,000 years of absolute dominance. "Ambassador," Kethros approached cautiously, his scales still pale with residual shock. "Our sensors have detected additional vessels emerging from concealment throughout the system. The count is currently at 17, all of them matching the configuration of the Prometheus." 17. Velthrani felt his legs threaten to buckle again. 17 vessels, each one capable of crushing his entire escort fleet single-handedly. The humans had not sent one warship to intimidate them. They had sent one warship to deliver a message while an entire fleet waited in the shadows. "Where were they hiding?" he asked, and his voice came out as barely a whisper. "Everywhere, Ambassador. In the asteroid belt, in orbit around the outer planets, in locations we never thought to scan because we assumed no species could build ships large enough to threaten us. They have been watching us since we entered the system, probably longer. We flew directly into a trap we did not even know existed." A trap, yes. That was exactly what this was. The humans had known the Conclave would come, had prepared for decades, had built weapons beyond anything in the galaxy, and had waited patiently for the moment to reveal themselves. Every assumption the Conclave had made about this species was wrong. "What do we know about their technology?" Velthrani asked, grasping for any scrap of useful intelligence. "How did they develop so quickly? Our records indicated they were barely capable of reaching their own moon a century ago." Kethros hesitated before answering. "Our analysis suggests they have had access to advanced technology for quite some time, possibly from the probe we sent to survey their system 80 years ago. We lost contact with that probe and assumed it had malfunctioned. It appears the humans captured it instead." The probe, of course. Velthrani remembered authorizing that mission himself, a routine survey of a primitive world that had just begun broadcasting radio signals. The probe was supposed to catalog the system and transmit its findings back to the Conclave. Instead, it had given humanity everything they needed to prepare for this day. "They reverse-engineered our technology," he said slowly, the implications settling over him like a weight. "More than that, Ambassador. They improved on it. The graviton weapon they deployed is something our scientists have theorized for centuries but never achieved. The humans did not just copy our work, they surpassed it. They learned from our probe and then pushed beyond everything we thought possible." This was worse than Velthrani had imagined. A species that could capture enemy technology and improve on it within a single generation was not a species that could be conquered through conventional means. They were adaptable, innovative, and clearly intelligent enough to keep their true capabilities hidden until the perfect moment. "Ambassador, the human admiral's shuttle is approaching," the communications officer announced. "She requests permission to dock." Velthrani straightened his posture and forced his mandibles into a neutral position. He was still an ambassador of the Conclave, and he would not show fear to these primitives. No, not primitives. He needed to stop thinking of them that way. They were equals, perhaps even superiors, and treating them otherwise would only lead to more disasters. "Grant permission. Have a security detail meet them at the airlock. Full ceremonial protocols." "Ambassador, is that wise? After what just happened, perhaps we should." "What? Refuse to meet with them? Hide in our quarters and hope they go away?" Velthrani's voice sharpened with bitter humor. "They have 17 warships surrounding us, each one capable of destroying this vessel with a single shot. If they wanted us dead, we would already be debris. They want to talk, and we will listen." The shuttle docked 15 minutes later, and Velthrani made his way to the diplomatic reception chamber with as much dignity as he could muster. His ceremonial robes suddenly felt heavy and foolish, relics of a time when the conclave's authority was absolute and unchallenged. The airlock opened with a hiss, and Admiral Helena Vance stepped through. She was smaller than Velthrani had expected, barely reaching his lower shoulders, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had just won a decisive victory. Her uniform was simple and practical, without the elaborate decorations that conclave officers favored. Behind her came a security detail of 6 soldiers in powered armor that made even the largest conclave warriors look frail. Their weapons were holstered but clearly visible, a reminder that the humans were not here to ask permission for anything. And behind the soldiers came a civilian, a human male in formal attire who carried no weapons but walked with an easy confidence that somehow felt more threatening than the armed soldiers around him. "Ambassador Velthrani," Admiral Vance said, and her voice was the same calm, measured tone she had used during the battle. "Thank you for receiving us. This is Marcus Chen, Senior Diplomatic Attaché for the United Earth Council. He will be handling the formal negotiations." Velthrani's mandibles clicked in surprise. The Admiral was not here to negotiate. The warrior who had just destroyed his fleet was stepping aside for a civilian. "I do not understand," he admitted. "In conclave tradition, the commander of a victorious fleet dictates terms to the defeated." "We are not the conclave," Chen replied, stepping forward. Admiral Vance's role was to demonstrate that humanity cannot be threatened or intimidated. "My role is to offer you a choice, a genuine choice, not the false ones your conclave has offered to countless species over the millennia." "A choice?" Velthrani could not keep the skepticism from his voice. "And what choice would that be? Surrender or destruction? Those are the only options the conclave has ever known." Chen smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Velthrani deeply uneasy. It was not the smile of a conqueror gloating over fallen enemies. It was the smile of someone who knew something you did not. "Ambassador, before we discuss choices, let me show you something that might help put things in perspective." He activated a small device on his wrist, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. It showed a star map, not of the Sol system, but of conclave space, 12 spheres of influence, hundreds of subject worlds, thousands of installations and shipyards and military bases. And scattered across that map, like drops of blood on clean fabric, were tiny red dots. "Those red markers," Chen explained calmly, "represent the current positions of our vanguard fleet, 147 stealth vessels, each one carrying enough firepower to cripple a major installation. They have been in position for 6 years, Ambassador, watching, waiting, learning everything about your conclave's defenses and vulnerabilities." Velthrani stared at the map in horror. The red dots were everywhere, near shipyards, near resource depots, near the homeworlds of the 12 spheres themselves. The humans had not just built a defensive fleet. They had infiltrated the heart of conclave territory without anyone noticing. "You are lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Such an operation would be impossible. Our sensor networks would have detected your vessels." "Your sensor networks," Admiral Vance interjected, "were designed to detect threats you understood. We spent decades developing technology specifically to avoid those systems. Every ship in our vanguard fleet is effectively invisible to anything the conclave possesses." Chen stepped closer, and his smile faded into something harder, something that reminded Velthrani of predators he had seen on primitive worlds, patient, calculating, and utterly without mercy. Ambassador, you came here expecting to find children playing with sticks and stones. Instead, you found a species that has been preparing for this moment for 80 years. We know your history, we know your methods, and we know exactly how to destroy you. The only question now is whether we will have to. Velthrani looked at the star map, at the impossible fleet surrounding his ship, at the two humans who stood before him with the fate of the conclave in their hands. And for the first time in his long career, he had absolutely no idea what to do. The silence in the diplomatic chamber stretched for what felt like an eternity. Velthrani stood motionless, his four arms hanging limply at his sides, his mind racing through possibilities and finding nothing but dead ends. The humans had outmaneuvered the conclave completely, and they had done it without the conclave even knowing a game was being played. "What do you want?" he finally asked, and his voice came out hollow, defeated. "If you have the power to destroy us, why negotiate at all? Why not simply unleash your fleet and be done with it?" Marcus Chen studied the ambassador for a long moment before responding. There was something almost like sympathy in his expression, though Velthrani suspected it was more complex than simple pity. "Because destruction was never our goal," Chen said quietly. "We built this fleet and positioned our ships throughout your space not because we wanted to conquer or annihilate, but because we wanted to ensure that, when this moment came, we would be negotiating from a position of strength. The conclave understands strength. It is the only language you have spoken for 11,000 years. "Then speak it clearly," Velthrani replied. "What are your terms?" Chen glanced at Admiral Vance, who nodded once. Then he turned back to the ambassador and began laying out what humanity demanded from the conclave of the 12 spheres. First, all vassal species currently held in bondage by the conclave will be released immediately. Every world that was forcibly integrated will be given the choice to remain affiliated or to pursue independence. Their resources, their labor, their futures, these belong to them, not to you. Velthrani's mandibles clicked sharply. Impossible. The conclave's economy depends on vassal contributions. You are asking us to destroy ourselves. "I am asking you to find a better way," Chen countered. "Your empire was built on slavery and exploitation. Those foundations were never stable and they were never moral. You can adapt or you can collapse under the weight of your own sins. That choice is yours." "Second," he continued, not giving the ambassador time to argue, "all slave populations will be freed, regardless of where they are currently located. Forced labor camps will be dismantled. Prisoners held without just cause will be released. The practice of population transfer, taking individuals from their homes to serve in distant sectors, ends immediately. Third, the leadership of the 12 spheres will face tribunals for crimes committed against sentient species over the past 11,000 years. We have documented evidence of genocide, mass enslavement, cultural destruction, and countless other atrocities. Those responsible will be held accountable." Velthrani felt the weight of these demands crushing down upon him. Each one was a knife aimed at the heart of everything the conclave had built. Releasing the vassal species would shatter their economic base. Freeing the slaves would cripple their industrial capacity. And putting the leadership on trial, that would tear apart the political structure that had held the 12 spheres together for millennia. "And if we refuse?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Admiral Vance stepped forward, and her eyes were cold as the void between stars. "Our vanguard fleet has standing orders. If negotiations fail, they will begin systematic attacks on conclave infrastructure. Shipyards first, then resource extraction facilities, then communication networks. We will not target civilian populations. We are not like you, but we will reduce the conclave's ability to wage war to nothing." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "And that is only the beginning. Once your military capacity is degraded, we will broadcast everything we know about the conclave's history to every species in this region of space. The atrocities, the betrayals, the lies you have told for 11,000 years, all of it will be revealed. You will turn the galaxy against us, Velthrani whispered. The galaxy is already against you, Chen replied. They simply do not know yet that they can fight back. We intend to show them that the old masters can bleed, and once they see that truth, every resentment that has been building for millennia will come pouring out. Your empire will not fall to human weapons. It will fall to the rage of all the species you have wronged. The ambassador stood in silence, processing the magnitude of what he faced. The humans were not simply threatening military defeat. They were threatening the complete dissolution of everything the Conclave had built, and they had the power and the positioning to make good on every single threat. Why, he asked at last, you have the power to take whatever you want. Why go to such lengths for species that are not your own? The Conclave's vassal worlds mean nothing to you. Chen's expression softened slightly, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that surprised the ambassador. Because we remember what it was like to be weak. Humanity's history is filled with empires that conquered and enslaved, and we know the cost of that evil better than most. We came very close to destroying ourselves before we ever reached the stars, wars, famines, environmental collapse, weapons that could have ended our species in an afternoon. We survived because we learned, Ambassador. We learned that the strong are not served by crushing the weak. We learned that cooperation builds more than domination ever could, and we learned that no empire built on suffering lasts forever. He gestured at the star map still floating in the center of the chamber. The Conclave's reign is ending, one way or another. The only question is whether you will be part of what comes next, or whether you will be remembered as the last tyrants of a dying age. Velthrani looked at the map, at the red dots surrounding every major conclave installation, at the vast reaches of space that his people had ruled for so long, at the future that was slipping through his fingers like sand. He thought about the Kethvari and the hollow worlds and all the species that had been ground to dust under the conclave's boot. He thought about the generations of his own people who had been taught that conquest was natural, that the weak existed only to serve the strong, that mercy was a weakness. And he thought about the humans, this strange, terrifying, impossible species that had risen from nothing to challenge the greatest power in the galaxy. They could have become conquerors themselves, could have built an empire on the ruins of the conclave. Instead, they were offering something different, something the galaxy had not seen in 11,000 years. You are asking us to become something we have never been, Velthrani said slowly, to abandon everything our civilization was built upon. We are asking you to become something better, Chen replied. The Conclave's knowledge, its resources, its organizational capacity, these things have value. They could be used to help rebuild what was destroyed, to forge new relationships based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Your species does not have to be remembered as villains, Ambassador. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the weight of history, with the ghosts of countless species who had suffered and died under conclave rule, with the potential of a future that might finally break free of the old patterns. Velthrani thought about the choice before him. Surrender meant the end of the conclave as he had known it, the end of Scythian dominance, the end of everything his ancestors had built. But refusal meant war against an enemy that had already proven itself superior, war that would end in the complete destruction of everything anyway. I cannot make this decision alone, he said finally. The 12 spheres must convene, the leadership must be informed. Of course, Chen nodded. We will provide you with secure communication access to contact your government. You have 72 hours to deliver our terms and receive a response. After that, Admiral Vance will assume that negotiations have failed. The ambassador straightened his posture, gathering what remained of his dignity. And if the conclave agrees to your terms, what then? Admiral Vance smiled, and for the first time there was warmth in it. Then we begin the hard work of building something new. Humanity did not come to the stars to destroy, we came to find our place among them. If the conclave can change, can grow, can become a partner instead of a tyrant, then we would welcome that partnership. She extended her hand, a human gesture of greeting and agreement that Velthrani had studied in preparation for this mission. The choice is yours, Ambassador. You can be the end of the old conclave, or you can be the beginning of something better. Velthrani looked at the extended hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out with one of his own limbs and clasped it. The age of conclave dominance was over. What came next would be written by those brave enough to imagine a different kind of future. And somewhere in the void, aboard 17 Titan-class dreadnoughts and 100 scattered stealth vessels, humanity watched and waited, ready to destroy if necessary, but hoping, with all the stubborn optimism that had carried their species through ice ages and plagues and wars, that destruction would not be required. The stars had belonged to tyrants for 11,000 years. It was time for something new to rise.